Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 3 of the GLP-1 Hub Podcast. I am so excited today to have another colleague of mine on to talk about something like very, very unique in the GLP-1 community. So I want to introduce Lindsay Cohen and let her tell you a little bit about herself as a registered dietitian and a person with type 1 diabetes.
Sounds good. Thanks, Anna. Thanks for having me on today. Like you said, I'm Lindsay Cohen. I actually have type 1 diabetes. I've lived with diabetes since I was 9 years old, so about 28 years now. And I'm also a dietitian. So I've been a dietitian for about 15 years, and I'm a certified diabetes care and education specialist. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
And a national board certified health and wellness coach as well.
Cool. So in your diabetes or in your dietitian practice, do you work exclusively with people with diabetes, or do you work with other types of people?
I do primarily diabetes. I've done a little bit of everything in my career as a dietitian, but in 2023, I decided to start my own business. It's called Mamabetes, and it's basically a blog and an online private practice for women, specifically moms, that have diabetes.
Okay, so you just work with the moms, not the kids necessarily?
Primarily the moms, yeah. My kind of target is the moms. And of course, if somebody, has a child with diabetes, I'm happy to work with them too. But I'm really trying to, focus on the moms because I think there's just not enough out there to support moms with diabetes.
Sure, definitely. So you got to take care of yourself and other people at the same time, which could probably be a lot.
Yeah, definitely makes it more challenging when you throw kids into the mix and schedules and all the craziness of life.
I saw a post that you posted where you said, show me you have diabetes without showing me you have diabetes, and you had like all your snacks and your water and all your things that you had prepared. Cool. So you had reached out, and we connected because of the GLP-1 and that you've been using it for your type 1 diabetes. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
I have been using a GLP-1. I use Ozempic. I've been using it for about 6 months now. And it is off-label for people with type 1 diabetes. Technically, it's not FDA approved for people with type 1. Really, there just hasn't been enough research done to prove that it's safe. But there have been more and more people with type 1 using GLP-1s and having fantastic results with them. So I had been talking to people on GLP-1s that had type 1, seeing people on social media, posting about it. And I just decided I really wanted to give it a try. It seemed like a really good opportunity to help with a lot of different things that type 1 struggle with. And I wanted to be able to relate to my patients better and try it out for myself to see if it made my life easier as well.
So what are some of the benefits that you have seen so far in these 6 months that you've been using it?
So it's honestly been life-changing for me. It's been so helpful for a few different reasons. So people with type 1 diabetes, there's a handful of other hormones besides insulin that they don't make properly. And it's really hard for people with type 1 to regulate their hunger levels. So being on a GLP-1 has helped me just not feel hungry and hangry all the time. It's really helped with, I'm still hungry. I'm taking a very low dose of it, but I don't get to the point where I'm hangry or starving nearly as much as I used to. And it's also really helped my blood sugar control too. So it's helped my blood sugars level out. My morning blood sugars are almost always in range now. And I think that's a combination of my Omnipod and my Dexcom CGM, in combination with the GLP-1. But that's been really helpful. It helps my post-meal blood sugars too. So I don't see as big of blood sugar swings. And I'm using less insulin. I'm using about 25 to 30% less insulin than I was previously.
Interesting. So how did you approach your doctor or prescriber to get started on this, or what was that conversation like?
So a lot of healthcare providers are still not quite on board for type 1s being on GLP-1s. Sure. I think it's kind of a mixed bag. And my endocrinologist is fantastic, but he's very by the book. And when I brought this up to him, he really was just not on board with it. I talked about some of the research I had seen and that kind of thing. But at the time, he just was, he told me it wasn't FDA approved for type 1s. It was off label, and he wasn't comfortable with it due to the risk of potential low blood sugars and side effects. And so we had talked about it at 2 separate appointments, and he was still not on board with it, but I really wanted to try it. So I actually found a nurse practitioner that I now work with virtually, and she's in the diabetes space, and he was able to prescribe it for me.
Okay. And so did you go back and tell your endocrinologist that you're taking it, or be like, now that worked?
I see him next month. So a little nervous about that appointment. I know. So we'll be getting my A1C checked for the first time since being on it and seeing him. So I'm hoping that I can help convince him that, it really is helpful, so that he can maybe consider it for other patients of his as well, if he sees how well I've been doing with it.
For sure. So in terms of like reducing your hunger, when you have type 1 diabetes, can you explain to me, because you're giving yourself, and excuse my lack of education, I probably should know more. You're giving yourself the insulin. Insulin is kind of a hormone that shows up after you've eaten, to tell your body that food is available. Is your hunger difficult to control because of the insulin, or because maybe the sugar is not getting where it needs to go in the cells? Like, can you explain that process to me?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a combination of a lot of different things. I don't think that it's necessarily, the insulin itself that makes you hungry, but there's a lot of other hormones that are kind of in the mix that we, just different hunger controlling hormones and things like that when you have type 1 diabetes, they're not regulated properly. So I think it's kind of a combination of that. Plus, fluctuating blood sugar levels that can make your hunger levels just a little bit out of the ordinary than somebody without type 1 diabetes.
Right. And so it's just like all the hormones are connected. So when one hormone is off, sometimes it affects the other ones as well. So like, I don't know, all of them they kind of work together and influence each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And what about any negative side effects that you've had at all since starting this GLP-1? Have you had any low blood sugars or too much weight loss? I don't know. Anything you want to share?
So the first week I took like the full dose, the smallest dose, the 0.25 milligram dose. And I felt pretty sick for the first few days. I was really nauseous. I didn't feel like eating anything. And I almost was like, I'm not going to take this. I don't want to feel sick. This isn't worth it. But the next week I decided, you know what, I'm going to try half of the dose, just half of the 0.25 and see how I feel. And I felt great. So I didn't have any of the nausea. I had, all the positive side effects that we talked about earlier, but none of the negative ones. So I've stuck with that dose since and haven't had any side effects at all. I don't have any low blood sugars from it. My insulin pump adjusts my insulin for me. So that's been really helpful. I haven't had to do much manual adjusting of my insulin, but that is something that people with type 1 do need to consider, is that they might need to reduce their insulin doses when they're on a GLP-1, especially at first. So it's been, nothing too negative, I would say, besides that first week when I think I was just taking a little bit more than what my body needed.
So then you're doing the compounded to be able to adjust the dose, because the pens only come in the 2.5.
I'm not doing the compounded. I'm actually doing the name brand Ozempic, and I just dial up less clicks on the pen.
The pen that I have for the Zepbound, which is not the same, is just like 2.5. Like there's no adjustment on it.
Yeah, it's a single use for the Zepbound. Yeah, so the Ozempic is a multi-use. You just dial up your dose and inject that, similar to an insulin pen. And so you can kind of play around with the dose a little bit more, which I'd always recommend talking to your doctor about that. But the nurse practitioner that I work with suggested, try a smaller dose if you don't feel great with the full dose, or, you could even space it out further. If you don't want to take it every 7 days, take it every 9 days if you feel better. So we kind of play around with it a little bit. And you can do that with Ozempic, since you can kind of mess with the dose a little bit.
See, I would like that.
It is really nice. Yeah, it's nice to have that flexibility.
Because I don't know if you're aware of like insurance issues around it. Like I had to fight to be able to go down to the 2.5. My insurance said they only wanted to cover 5, 10, or 15. They didn't want to cover they consider the 0.5s like a transitional dose. And so they only cover 1 per year for that. And so like I wasn't really having side effects on the 5, but like I didn't want to keep losing weight. Yeah. And so like I had to have my doctor write like, oh, she can't tolerate the 5, so she has to be on the 2. Like it was a fight.
Which is so silly. You think they would just let you get what you need and not fight you on making you take more than that.
I don't know if they have like a deal for like covering the other, you know what I mean? They strike these deals with the pharmaceutical companies. And so the pharmaceutical companies giving them a discount on the 5, 10, 15 or what it is.
Probably.
But that's good to know, because I was not aware of that the Ozempic I wonder if the Mounjaro allows that too, since that's for diabetes and not.
I can't remember if Mounjaro is a single use, but there are, little hacks you can do, even with like the Zepbound, where you can inject it into an empty vial and, draw it up with a syringe. So there are little things that you can do to kind of manipulate it, even with the single use pens. That are probably all very much off label as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of interest right now in like micro dosing for GLP-1, even for people who aren't diabetic or who aren't overweight or anything. Like I have a friend who's like super fit and she microdoses it for dementia prevention.
Okay. Interesting. I haven't heard of that.
I don't know how she's getting it. I don't know how she's doing it, but that's what she told me. So
very interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be so much more research coming out, about all these other benefits of it, because it's pretty amazing, all these different things that it has been found to help with.
Sure. No, it just keeps getting more and more. And I want to talk about the future a little bit later. In terms of people with type 1 diabetes, like what are some suggestions that you have of ways that they could maybe bring this up with their healthcare provider if, they're not into it or don't know? I don't want to say don't know about it. Everybody knows about it. But, what are some suggestions that you have?
Yeah. So I think it's definitely a good idea to talk about it with their healthcare provider. I think just bringing it up in conversation and asking, do you have any patients with type 1 that take GLP-1s and what have their experiences been like? And, is it something that you would recommend for me? And just having, a conversation about it, just to see that provider's comfort level and to see, if it is something that they're willing to do and kind of just going from there, talking about maybe some of the research that you have seen about the GLP-1s and type 1, just to get that conversation started is what I would recommend.
Right. And then, like you said, there are a lot of prescribers out there in the world who are willing to do it. But in terms of finding let's say your endocrinologist like yours is like, no, how would you find a quality provider? Because, everybody and their mother is selling these GLP-1. Since I started this podcast, like several sellers of this medication have contacted me, and I'm cautious. I do want to find a partner at some point to like refer to of people who want to use it, but I want to be very cautious about where that is coming from and who that is and all the things.
Yeah.
So how would you suggest that someone find a provider that might be quality? Like, what should you look for?
That's a good question, because like you said, there are so many different, companies out there and compounding pharmacies and, this and that are trying to sell these drugs now. And you have to be careful because you don't know where they're getting it or where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. So if your doctor's not willing to prescribe it, I would recommend, just trying to find a qualified healthcare professional that you can trust. Maybe it's, a dietitian or somebody that in your network or in your community that you could talk to about resources that are either in your area or virtual. I help people with that a lot, just in my practice, just finding somewhere where they can get the medication safely if their doctor is not necessarily on board with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I think you got to really vet who you're getting it from, where you're getting it from, where it's coming from, all the things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So if someone is using a GLP-1 for diabetes, are there any different lifestyle things they need to think about, or foods they should eat or shouldn't eat, or anything that you want to share about like how it might be different from somebody using it for weight loss?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is just to be cautious of the potential of low blood sugars, because these medications do make you a little bit more insulin sensitive and they might reduce how much insulin you need to take. People with type 1 do have to watch out for lows, especially when they first start taking it, or if they do increase their dose, that chance of low blood sugars is a lot more likely. So just really keeping an eye on blood sugars, ideally being on a continuous glucose monitor so you can see them in real time is what I would recommend, and adjusting insulin as needed. Working with your doctor, your dietitian, somebody that can help you make those changes in real time as needed, just to make sure that you're staying safe. Besides that, I think really just like everybody else, making sure that you're eating enough calories to maintain your muscle mass, enough protein, keeping up with trying to get in some resistance training and strength training to help keep those muscles strong. I think most other things are really very, very similar to the general population, but just being cautious of low blood sugars, especially at first.
Would you recommend like somebody that with type 1 that's using this eat a little bit more regularly, like on a more regular schedule, just to be ensure that they're not going to go low?
Yeah. I think that, just trying to eat every few hours is very helpful. People that are on a continuous glucose monitor, they're going to know when they're dropping and when they need to eat. But I think just getting in the habit of having a regular eating schedule can be helpful to prevent any lows from happening and just to make sure that they are eating enough.
Right. And so if you're going to put together a meal for somebody who has type 1 diabetes, and I know it obviously varies like based on their carbs and where their sugars are and all the things, like how would you recommend like planning that sort of meal?
Yeah, I am a big proponent and I always recommend the plate method. I know it's old and it's, boring, but it really works well. And so for people that don't know what that is, it's really just if you think about that plate, half of it is some kind of non-starchy vegetables, a quarter would be some kind of protein, and then a quarter would be some kind of carbohydrate or, starchy food. So trying to stick with that, I think really helps ensure that you're getting enough fiber, you're getting enough protein, you're getting some carbs, but not going crazy with them. And that seems to work really well for balancing blood sugars.
And so give me an example of a meal that would include that, because maybe people don't know like what that looks like.
So that could be, if it's, let's say it's a dinner meal, it could be having, a big salad and then having some kind of, maybe it's some kind of like a piece of chicken or salmon or something like that. And then having maybe a baked potato, like a small baked potato, or if it's a real big baked potato, maybe a half of a baked potato along with it. So something like that would be kind of in general what that would look like.
Right. And so what do you do if you're on a GLP-1, you have type 1 diabetes, and you're just like not hungry? You just don't want to eat anything.
So I think if that's how you're feeling, then it's a sign that you're taking too much. You probably need to look at that dose and get on a smaller dose if possible. Because what I always tell people is you shouldn't feel like nauseated and so full that you can't eat. And if you do, you're probably taking too much. So if that happens, and you've already taken it and you're in it for the week, just trying to eat smaller, more frequent meals, trying to get, maybe you can get in like a smoothie or some, a drink with protein powder, or having some things that are like high in calories that you can like peanut butter and nuts and seeds and things like that can help sustain you with smaller amounts while you're just kind of feeling like I can't eat very much. But if possible, reducing that dose so that you're not feeling that way is what I would recommend.
Right. I think that not ever feeling hungry, at least for me, like there was one time where I went up in my dose and I couldn't eat anything, and it was miserable, and it wasn't, I didn't feel sick. It was just, I got full. And my husband and I went like on this date night to this nice restaurant, and I wanted to eat. Like, I mean, paid all this money for food, and I had one bite and had to take the rest. I don't know. I personally don't want to live like that.
No, and that's the thing. Like, you should still enjoy food. It should still bring you joy. You shouldn't feel like you don't want to eat anymore or that you don't enjoy it. If you feel that way, then you're probably just taking too much.
Right. So I think that there's some doctors out there, and I don't want to speak for, all doctors, who just want to follow the protocol, go up. But I think that maybe finding somebody who's willing to not force you to do that.
Yeah.
Is really beneficial. At least it has been for me, that I'm like, this is what I want. I don't want to go up. Don't force me to go up. Like, this is where I want to be, because I just don't want to feel like that. And you're lucky that you found somebody who's supportive of that too.
Yeah, because only you know how you feel, and there's no reason to take more medication than what you need.
Definitely. So what else would you recommend for somebody on type 1 that's like not nutrition related? Is there any other thoughts that you have, that you're seeing around people wanting to use it, or lifestyle changes they need to make, or other things to look out for?
I think the big things with type 1 are, I'm trying to think what would be different than kind of just the general population in terms of...
How would you handle exercise?
Yeah. So with exercise, there's already a risk of low blood sugar when you have diabetes. So being even more cautious of that, I think, is important. So trying to really be careful with when you're taking your insulin around exercise, especially if you've taken a GLP-1 already, it's in your system, and then you're taking your insulin, you're going to exercise. There's a good chance that you could drop and go low. So maybe having a snack that has some carbohydrates before you exercise. And when you take your insulin and then you exercise, it acts a lot more potent. It's almost like 2 times, more potent than if you, aren't exercising after taking it. So just trying to maybe plan your exercise around a time where maybe you haven't just had a meal and taken your insulin, or if you can't, you can't change that timing, then just taking less insulin at that meal prior to account for the fact that you will be doing some exercise can be really helpful. But just knowing that that's going to be, magnified being on a GLP.
Sure. So I like to exercise first thing in the morning on coffee. Don't tell anybody. So if you have type 1 diabetes, that's probably not a good idea for you.
So actually, I do the same. I like to exercise first thing in the morning, and it works great because I don't have much insulin on board at that time. All night I've been sleeping. I haven't eaten anything yet. And so I hardly have any insulin in my body. And so when I exercise at that time, I hardly ever go low. So it actually, for me, it's a great time to exercise.
And you don't eat anything either?
I don't eat anything before, typically. No. And that's...
It's fine.
It's totally fine. My blood sugar usually stays pretty steady throughout, and I'll always bring something with me just in case, Sure. I'm out on a walk or at a exercise class and my blood sugar drops. I always am prepared, like you saw in my Instagram post, but I usually don't have any issues at that time.
Interesting. So I would think that if you're already like fasting and you're already on the lower side, and then you exercise and you burn more of your, blood sugar, then it would make it drop, further.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is the insulin on board. So the fact that there's not much on board at that time, and it depends what kind of exercise you're doing too. If you're doing strength training, that might actually make your blood sugar rise. Whereas if you're doing something that's hardcore cardio, you might see a little drop. You might need a little something to eat before that, even first thing in the morning to prevent a low. But everybody's bodies are so different. It's kind of trial and error to figure out what works best for you individually.
Sure. So I wore a continuous glucose monitor for a study I was participating in for a minute. And I found that during my exercise, my blood sugar went up. And it was probably because my body was like, what the heck? And throwing blood sugar out of my liver to keep me going because it was fasted. Do you find that yours goes up at all during exercise or no?
Yeah, it does sometimes, especially when I do a strength training workout fasted in the morning. It usually does go up a little bit. So sometimes I'll even take a little bit of insulin right before that, knowing that it probably will rise, 10 or 20 points just to help keep it level.
Okay. Yeah. So good. Not abnormal. So talking about just the GLP-1s in general and the future, because I saw recently an article that in I think it was in Nature or something that talked about there's 10 of these medications under production, under, development. What are your thoughts about that in terms of GLP-1, in terms of diabetes treatment, in terms of the future with these medications? Where do you think we're headed?
Yeah, I think it's great that there's so many more that are coming on the market that can help people. And I am very, very hopeful that more research is done specifically for type 1 diabetes and GLP-1s, because, I think the biggest issue is that there hasn't been that much research done, and that's why they haven't been approved. That's why they're, off-label still. So if there's more research that can be done that shows all these benefits for people with type 1, in the future, I really, really hope that this is something that's offered to every type 1 as an option to help kind of streamline their diabetes management and make it easier for them. And I think that would be the dream.
Yeah, for sure. Why do you think that they're excluding type 1? You think it's just too complicated? They're we don't want to deal with these people. It's just their insulin and their...
Yeah. I mean, I think you think about GLP-1s and they're meant to lower blood sugar. And, I think the big concern is hypoglycemia and low blood sugar. There's also been some studies and some issues with people going into DKA with GLP-1s and even at regular normal blood sugars going into DKA. And so that's another concern. So if you're not eating enough and not taking much insulin at all, there is that risk. So that's another thing that I should have mentioned earlier that I do counsel people on, is making sure that you're eating enough, drinking plenty of water, taking insulin, because you can't go without insulin because that risk of DKA is much higher, and just making sure that you have ketone test strips at home so that you can keep an eye on that too.
Can you explain to the people what DKA is and how you get into that and what the concerns are? 'Cause not everybody,
Yeah, DKA it stands for diabetic ketoacidosis. And it's basically when your body kind of starts to go into this state that you can get really, really sick. Your body everything gets more acidic, and sometimes you see people like starting to throw up or starting to get like a fruity smell in their breath. It's basically lots of ketones are being produced, and it can get really dangerous really quickly. So people, are usually hospitalized for it. And it's something that has to be taken seriously and has to be treated because it can be life-threatening.
Right. And so that happens when you don't have enough blood sugar or not enough insulin on board, or like what's
it generally happens when your blood sugar is very, very high and you don't have insulin on board, that blood sugar is rising. That's when you typically see it happen. But some people that are on these GLP-1 medications are just not eating enough and not taking any insulin, and that can actually cause their body to go into DKA. At a regular blood sugar even. So that is something that people do need to just be aware of. And another reason why you don't want to be on too high of a dose, because if you are and you're, really not hungry and, not eating, then that can kind of make that something that could be more likely to happen.
Right. So if somebody doesn't eat, and so they're like, oh, I don't need as much insulin, but their body's still like, we need food and we need insulin. And then they just start producing, the cells aren't getting the food that they need.
Right.
And so it starts producing ketones, which is like I don't want to say it's a starvation. It's not, because there's still ketones on board when you're not starving. But in excess.
Yeah, exactly.
And eventually the body turns acidic and starts like, and that's, your body controls your pH levels very, very, very strictly.
Yeah.
And I know it can eventually cause a coma and really severe side effects.
It can, It can cause a lot of severe side effects. It can make you really sick. So it's something to, not take lightly. So
the prevention of that would be regular meals, continuing to take your insulin, monitoring your blood sugar levels. Anything else, any symptoms that you might, because you said vomiting, but like the GLP-1 could make you vomit.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is also just staying well hydrated too, making sure you're drinking plenty of water. But having those ketone strips on hand, they're super easy to use. You basically just, you just dip them into urine and you can see where your ketone levels are. So having those on hand, because if you do start vomiting kind of out of the blue and you're like, is it the GLP-1? Am I starting to develop ketones? What's going on here? You could check and just have some peace of mind and know what's going on and if there is an issue. So I think, any kind of symptoms like that, if you do start kind of having some nausea or vomiting out of the blue that wasn't there before, that kind of comes on pretty suddenly, or if you just don't feel right, something doesn't feel right, you could check those ketone levels.
Sure. That's good advice, because I know that's a danger for type 1 diabetes, and that may be why they don't want to research it, because they're just like, this is too much of a risk.
Yeah, and it's expensive to research it too. It costs a lot of money. So I think there will be more research in that area. I've heard of, some research down the pipeline that hopefully will be happening, but I think it's going to take time.
Cool. Yeah, I hope so, because it's already come out that it's good for sleep apnea and heart disease and all these other things. So, not regular diabetes, regular diabetes, type 2 diabetes, so I think that why not type 1 also at some point?
Yeah, a lot of people with type 1 struggle with all those same things and can benefit from it just as much.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to talk with you about your experience with type 1 or work with you because they have diabetes, where can they find you?
So you can find me. My website is mama-beaties.com. And so you can find me there. I'm on Instagram at Mama Beatty's blog. And I actually created a Facebook group recently specifically for people with type 1, women with type 1 specifically, on GLP-1s. So you can find me there as well. You can search on Facebook for that. It's Mama Beatty's GLP-1 T1D Thrive Tribe is the group name. So any of those places, I'd love to connect.
Cool. That's great. That's a lot of great resources for people who have type 1 or who even just need support, and you work with anyone on type 1, they don't necessarily need to be on a GLP.
Exactly. Yeah. I work with anyone with type 1. I work with people with all types of diabetes, type 1, type 2, gestational prediabetes. So yeah, but I have a special place in my heart for type 1s, and especially type 1s that are interested in GLP-1.
Sure, definitely. So we'll put all those links to all the resources in the show notes. And I want to say thank you so much, Lindsay, for being here and sharing your story. This was such a unique topic that wasn't even on my radar.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. All right.